Monica, thank you so much for joining us today. Super excited to be having this conversation with you. It's been amazing getting to know you in person, virtually, and through different mediums. So looking forward to our conversation. For our audience, yeah, absolutely. Monica is the head of customer success at Notion. She focuses on the Americas region, and she's also a community organizer running the CDS meetup along with her colleagues. That is a bi-coastal meetup, happens twice a year. I just attended one in San Francisco a month ago. It was amazing at the Notion HQ. Highly recommend. And there's another one happening in New York, I hear, November 9th, which I'll also be going to. So definitely hit up Monica to become a part of that. She's also a member of CS Angel and a global traveler. You have had a cool journey from Miami to DC to San Francisco, and a lot of great customer success experiences along the way. So excited for the conversation. Is there anything you'd want to share before we dive in?
Cool. Thanks for the intro, Saga. Really appreciate it. Excited for our chat today. Yeah, I've had the chance to build CS at a number of organizations at this point, from everything from a pre-seed company. My previous company was, pre-seed, pre-revenue through about 10 million in ARR, and then had the chance to join Notion, which is a little bit more beyond that, and then through the growth stage. So I've been able to luckily see kind of the two different stages of hyper growth. So I hope we can get into that today. But apart from that, just generally really passionate about the customer success community. So as you mentioned, I think that there are a few times a year where the CS community really gets together. I think all of us know about Pulse with Gainsight, but really we're trying to kind of make this all throughout the year and get together in pockets in different cities. And so New York is coming up soon. We just had San Francisco. But I'm originally from Miami, grew up my whole life in Miami, went to college in the Northeast, and then started working professionally for the first time in DC. Spent a couple of years in DC and then pivoted into tech. And so I started working at a very small, as I mentioned, pre-revenue tech startup. It actually took me to India for a while. So I was doing the kind of India-US thing, working in both global offices, and then finally ending up in San Francisco with Notion. So definitely had a chance to go coast to coast.
Yes, and that puts you in a pretty unique category of folks who've been able to HU in two different countries, and two countries that work a lot together. And I'm very biased there. I hail from both of those countries in some senses.
Totally.
Very cool. So let's dive into your world at Notion. And I've had the privilege to see you in your element at the HQ in San Francisco. But for our viewers, could you tell us about your team? How many team members are you managing? How are you segmenting your customers? Give us a view into what does the customer success organization at Notion look like?
Yeah, totally. So Notion is maybe a little bit unique in that we have kind of all of the things going on. We are a PLG company. We also have a very strong consumer product, so B2C. We also have a very strong self-serve motion where anybody can sign up. Access to the product is really easy. You can sign up with Foresight and put a credit card on file and start using Notion. And then we also have a sales-led organization that sells our larger contract sizes and is wholly B2B. So we have a lot of those things going on. Different parts of the business are growing at different speeds. Some of them, the sales-led side of the business, for example, is the minority, but it's fastest growing. And so that's where my team sits. My team sits on the sales-led side of the business, where Notion is being sold through a sales cycle, B2B, very large deployments of Notion at an organization. And then my team starts post-sales. And so we do everything from deal get signed all the way through the initial onboarding, the initial implementation, kind of driving all of the adoption and the value throughout the year, hoping that the customer stays on with us for many, many years to come. For those listening that don't know what Notion is, we like to call ourselves the connected workspace. So it's an internal productivity tool for your organization. You can think about it as a place to house your company's notes, docs, wiki, project management, and task management. And so I joined Notion because I was a super fan of the product, and I wanted to be somewhere more mission driven where we use the product every single day and we experience the benefits from our own product and get a chance to bring that to our customers. So it's been really exciting because we use Notion day in and day out. We learn the best practices, we build the best practices, and then of course we can work with our customers on that.
I love it. And I am also a power user of Notion myself, pre and during Foresight. Our whole business actually runs on Notion. Free ad for Notion here, but CRM, product release notes, roadmap, all of that is in there. So it's a great tool. So anybody who's not using Notion, please check it out. It's a lifesaver and very fun to use.
Give you the $20 later.
There we go. You mentioned sales led, so hey.
There we go. There we go. I can talk about the segmentation piece.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I was a really early hire at Notion, kind of there to build the CS org, and I joined when we were under 50 employees. We're getting closer to the like 800 mark now. I've lived many lives at Notion, and we've probably thought through every possible segmentation that you can think of. But I'm a huge fan of segmentation, and oftentimes when I'm working with very early CS teams, or sometimes startups have their first CS hire, they're like, what's the first thing that I should do? And I say, if you have enough customers, you need to start segmenting them. Segmenting is going to help you determine exactly how you should act, what you should drive for that customer in a very tailored way. And I think for segmentation specifically, like I always believed you only segment because the segmentation is useful, because the segmentation is going to drive how you behave, and it's actually going to show differences in the operating model. You don't just segment for the sake of segmenting. And that's why it's so business specific. Certain things matter to what you're trying to drive in your business. And so for Notion, certain times we've done segmentation wholly based on how much they're paying us, so contract sizes. At another point, we did segmentation wholly based off of company size, so employee count at an organization. Other times we've done a hybrid of both. Other times we've done segmentation that actually looks at what does their current adoption look like, right? And so we've gone through different models, and so I always like to say, like, what are you trying to drive? What's the biggest goal for your business? Is it growth? Is it early adoption? Maybe you have an onboarding problem. And depending on that, try to find the patterns and the similarities within your customer base to segment them in a way that they're therefore going to determine the motion that you actually apply.
Absolutely. I think it's really a challenge when you are balancing product-led growth, sales-led growth, horizontal platform, consumer, everything as complex as it gets. And I think it's interesting that your team is totally focused on sales-led growth. Makes total sense. What are some of the differences you're noticing from the product-led side of the house to the sales-led side of the house when it comes to the success motion? Because if it's a new start versus an upgrade, right? If you're product-led, it's a different world. So curious if you could double-click into that and tell us about how is the customer's perception unique in both of those worlds?
Yeah, great question. For product-led companies, you're probably giving some part of your product away for free. So the barrier to entry is really, really low. That's what it is for Notion. You can easily sign up. You can get a large chunk of the value of our product very quickly and for free, essentially. And I think I see a lot of product-led products who actually have a really strong sales motion, but their product-led side is the barrier to entry into that world, and they give away a portion of their product for free. And so what's unique about that is by the time that we're having a sales conversation, the prospect has some level of usage with our product and understands the offering of the product, how to use a product, and in some sense the core value. So you're entering into a conversation where they have some level of exposure, sometimes a lot of exposure and a lot of usage of the product. And so we see that engine as one thing. I actually don't see them as two separate things. I don't see product-led and sales-led. I see that one is feeding into the other. So our product-led really drives the leads, drives our install base that then goes into our sales-led motion. But by the time the conversation becomes sales-led, it's usually because of a trigger that means that they are ready to enter into the partnership in a deeper way. Either they want to invest, for their whole company, they want to think about a company-wide deployment, they want to think about more advanced security features, better training, better best practices through their CSM. So there's some trigger that takes them from product-led to sales-led that tells
Yeah.
us they're ready to invest in the partnership in a very real way. And at that point in time, everything is different. The stakeholders are different. The people who need to sign off are very different than probably the initial end users or the initial champions and power users. And so now we're working with a much larger committee of folks, and we're thinking through a long-term, probably more expensive, Notion experience for our customers. And I always talk about how, like, an analogy would be, you have a condo and you want to paint the walls in your condo, or you want to put some new furniture in the condo. You're absolutely free to do that. You have free reign, and you're enjoying it, and you're making the condo look beautiful. But the second that you want to change a window or install a staircase, you can't do that on your own. You need to kind of get permission from the association. You need to work with others to make these big major changes, these big major investments. And that's how I see product-led to sales-led. Get other stakeholders involved. IT needs to come in, the CFO needs to come in, and at this point we say, all right, all hands on deck. What is this going to look like for 2-3 years to come?
Wow, it's a great analogy. And as a condo owner having experience with this, the homeowners association meetings, right, every year, QBRs maybe, or
there you go.
Both sides come together. It's not the best, but the homeowners association is pretty unorganized, but very different for the world that you're in.
Totally.
It's a cool analogy. That makes a lot of sense, and it's yeah, I think it's a world that a lot of our audience doesn't really have view into, because so many companies are sales led and enterprise led, and are trying to get product led growth. But Notion grew up in that world, now has the best of both. So I think it's a unique piece of it. On from that, what is the way that you measure value for your customers look like? Because I can imagine that Notion user, I've got hundreds of use cases. I'm leveraging Notion for, as I mentioned, my product roadmaps, CRM, notes, investor updates, the list goes on. I love the share feature, by the way, where you can send the web pages to folks, right? That's really nice. So how does your team track verified outcomes, desired outcomes of your customers, and enable that future value selling motion?
Totally. It's a combination of data, just data-driven validation, some hypotheses, and then also talking to our customers, asking our customers, having those conversations. And so on the one hand, on the data side, Notion can do a lot. And a lot of our products can do a lot, but probably the core value that your customers are getting is concentrated with a subset of the feature functionality. And so although Notion can do a ton of things, we've identified over the years the top actions in the product and the top activities that a user is doing in the product that is most highly correlated with long-term retention and long-term expansion. So there's a lot of things you could be doing, but we specifically know that if you are doing these things, that's a very good sign for longevity of this customer and potential to retain and grow this customer. And that took a number of years. We've done a ton of regression analyses. You need to have a big user base to kind of understand that over time. But we actually feel really good that we understand like what great looks like and how that has mapped to long-term outcomes. That's the data side of the house. I would say the qualitative side of the house is through the sales process, getting that information, documenting that information, and then constantly tying every interaction back to that information. And so for our sales process, as I mentioned, once the prospect comes in, they do go through a sales cycle. They speak to our account executives. And our account executives follow a methodology, different ones out there, MEDPIC, command of the message, but they do follow that methodology, and they're required to capture a lot of information about the customer. So what is their desired outcome? What would happen if they didn't have this product? What competitors are they comparing us against? What does their before state look like? What does their after state look like? And in Salesforce, we track all of that over time. Everything from the initial SDR conversation all the way to deal closure. We have an idea of what the customer wants to get out of Notion and how they would define value, which is specific. We do hear repetitive patterns, but it's specific to each customer. And so what we try to do from the customer success side is we have access to all of that information. We use that information to draft our materials, to draft our kickoff document, to draft our roadmap with that customer, and we say, hey, we see that you are trying to do A, B, and C things with Notion, and these are your 3 goals. if we chat in 6 months from now, success will look like we achieved these three outcomes. And so we do track that in our CRM, and we make sure that, as I mentioned, the kickoff is really aligned to driving those outcomes. We are checking in with our customer at regular checkpoints to make sure we're mapped against those. And we also try to define custom analytics that will verify these outcomes. And so, for example, a customer might say, my goal is that Notion becomes our company-wide source of truth for everything. Great, that's an amazing goal. Some analytics that the CSM would think about would be, number one, like monthly active usage. Do we have the vast majority of your employees logging into Notion? Number two would be, are they accessing the top company-wide pages that share your kind of knowledge base? And number three, were we able to eliminate the other tools so that they stopped going to those other tools and Notion did in fact become the source of truth? So are we seeing either reduced or complete disappearance of other tools, like maybe things lived in Dropbox before? Are they eliminating Dropbox? Are we seeing more active usage in Notion? Are we bringing and importing that information into Notion? So we make sure that we repeat back analytics to the customer that has to do with their verified outcomes, and not just vanity metrics about Notion, but rather things that are validating what the customer said that they wanted to do. And usually that happens over the first 6 months, but can continue throughout the year. And of course, it comes back up at the renewal conversation.
Okay, got it. The point about getting the customer to self-report what their outcomes are, their desired outcomes, what is that process like? Because when I've talked to a lot of folks in your shoes, it's hard for CS teams to do that because the customer may not know what they want. They may not want to tell you because they think they're going to get upsold on the back end. They're giving you too much information. But what is your process for guiding that customer to tell you what's on their mind, but in the context of business outcomes?
Yeah, it definitely starts with good discovery during the sales cycle. We absolutely need that to happen. It's not the only way, but if we don't have good discovery on pain points during the sales cycle and an understanding of who is invested in making Notion a success at the company, then it's really going to be hard for us to take that conversation forward. So once we have really good discovery, we understand the pain points, we actually have to do a little bit of educating to the customer. We have to be a little bit prescriptive. And so we tell the customer, hey, looks like you want to do all of these things with Notion. We can do all of that and more, but we're not going to be successful unless you give us X, Y, Z things. You need to give us who is the owner on your side that's going to work with us, who is the economic decision maker, what do they care about. We actually prescribe what we need from them to be able to have a really successful rollout and implementation. And once we get those right folks in the room, which for a PLG company oftentimes includes like the product champions and the power users, or like the content admins of who are going to administrate the tool. Once we tell the customer we need these people in order to proceed, then that's when we're able to have a much more productive conversation around what success could look like, what we can help them with, even educate them on things that they didn't even know were possible, because we lay out kind of the surface area of what we're able to cover. I will say, like, we don't want to overwhelm the customer, so oftentimes it's little by little. And on the customer success side, we think about maturation. So it's not that the customer is going to be at level 10 using everything advanced from day one. So we think about unraveling that with the customer little by little. We understand what their core number one desired outcome is. There's a sales methodology that says, like, attach yourself to the biggest problem first. So we try to solve for that first, whether that's something as simple as just our note taking or just our documentation product. And then over time, as we continue to learn more about that business, we walk the halls of that company, of our customer, then we can continue to kind of propose additional solutions that are to what we understand what they're trying to do. But it is probably a slower burn and tied to maturation if we really want to do this in a way that the customer is going to have, one foot in front of the other in terms of value extraction.
Gotcha. You mentioned once you've defined the verified outcomes or the desired outcomes, you're measuring that through native product triggers, if they've accessed certain pages or how many times they logged in or spent time in the knowledge base, so to speak. So that's a really key piece. I'm curious, how are you measuring the perception of value, or how do the customers feel about that? Is that important to you all to track that? And if so, how do you think about that leg of the stool?
For sure. I would say that this has become more on the forefront this year because of the macro that we're having. And so I would say that in previous years, when tides are high and everyone's doing great, you can just talk about your product, you can just talk about your features. People love Notion. It's great. So many champions. The UI is beautiful. We can pretty much rely on that. But this year, we've definitely had to reframe our thinking and reframe our conversations with customers to elevate them to this value piece that you were talking about. So it's no longer like we could make you more productive and like help you collect action items, but we've needed to elevate those conversations to an ROI conversation, how your business operates, lost time through using lots of fragmented tools. We talked a lot about like team collaboration. We've talked a lot about like consolidating and deconsolidating other tools and bringing that into one single place, one single source of truth. And so we've learned the hard way that in cases where we were not attaching ourselves to business value and ROI at the company, that oftentimes we were on the chopping block, and oftentimes the conversations came down to this is just a feature set. We can figure this out with a competitor tool or with an existing tool. So in the last year, we've really had to think about this kind of like connected workspace. What is the experience of having your company like operating system on Notion and having a really strong ecosystem on Notion? And we've had to validate that through customer stories, through different ROI points, we have a business case calculator now. And so I would say that the value selling piece has come to the forefront a lot more in the last year. Um, and so when we go back to measuring value, we're measuring value in terms of did we fundamentally change the way that this company operates? Did we create a culture of documentation at a company that didn't have it? Or did we help them, work more cross-functionally because now their marketing team is working with the product team, and before they weren't able to do that because the product team was only in Jira, for example.
Right.
So that's how we've had to think about it.
That makes sense. It's a challenge that a lot of organizations are having to face right now because value means so much. It's so different to different organizations as well. And it's interesting that you're saying you're dialing in the specific outcomes to your customers. It could be different from A to B to C, but also you need to standardize it as well, because to tell these customer stories back and say, well, your peers are getting this value with us. Here's how their business have transformed, and kind of relate that back. So I can imagine that's a push pull challenge that creates some nuance in how you engage these customers, but also provide an opportunity. It's really interesting. So would love to understand personal narrative of either yourself in the situation or a customer success manager on your team who's responsible for engaging the customer, making sure they were getting value, but it's hard, right? There's sometimes disconnects in the customer understanding what you're trying to get them to realize. So is there anything you're willing to share or able to kind of articulate there?
Sure, yeah. Um, Oftentimes what we see is when companies purchase Notion at a wide scale, what they're really saying is, I'm ready to take knowledge management, I'm ready to take documentation and collaboration seriously at my company. Like we're ready for a solution that's going to help us work more efficiently, that's going to help create visibility and transparency. And so we're ready to adopt Notion. But sometimes they don't have that culture already. So like you can buy the tool, but you also need to have the practices internally. We talk about this all the time. I always say you can buy all of the gym clothes that you want. Doesn't mean you're going to the gym.
Right.
So a lot of what my team does is that change management piece, that framework and kind of methodology around like how do you
Mm-hmm.
promote a great operating structure at your company? How do you promote folks to share and take meeting notes? How do you teach your teams to work asynchronously? So we do a lot of that change management. And so I think that when we're having the value conversation, something that comes to mind is like, oh well, like we just have, it's just docs in Notion, or it's just like task management Notion. We say no, actually, like one customer looked into their internal Slack channel that is where employees ask kind of general questions. They also looked into their internal IT tickets, and they also looked into their employee onboarding through their people team. And they spoke to those stakeholders, and all of them said, because of Notion, we've seen a reduced volume in just generic questions being asked, less internal IT tickets
Wow.
being created, and a much better onboarding experience because the people team in this example built an amazing like 30-day onboarding plan for all of their new hires in Notion, and like it's just self-serve, they follow along, they do everything asynchronously. So I think if we would have stuck to features, it would have been sure, yeah, you can take notes wherever, everyone can take notes wherever they want. But I think we were able to zoom out and say, what's the overall impact on the organization and the kind of behaviors of your employees at this organization, where they're spending a lot less time on finding information, there's less mental friction in figuring all of that out, and we're able to spend more time in just like their core outcomes. And so that was actually a really cool example because we were able to have so many cross-functional stakeholders say like, no, actually, we can't get rid of Notion. We need to keep Notion because Notion is making my job easier and is making the employee experience much more seamless. So that was a good.
Yeah, it's a great story where you need to engage folks on their own terms, right? And it's cool to hear that they were looking through their systems and telling you rather than you looking through your systems and telling them. I think that's a great measure or indicator that customers getting value and
That's
you're
right.
able to connect on that level.
That's right.
Yeah. Um, so you mentioned your team is doing a lot of change management services, consulting almost, right, to help these organizations transform into the world that Notion enables. How has your organization had to evolve to support that need? Because from my perspective, when I was a CSM, we had our playbooks, we had our actions to take, and then if this came up, it's like, well, what do we do here? This is a new capability, right? This might be managed services. Maybe this isn't a different team, that training team or paid services. So how is that need of change management becoming a part of your capabilities? Is that training people on how to doing it as a new team? What does that look like?
I think it's made the value of the customer success manager much higher and much more strategic, which has been a really exciting shift on my team. Because I think for a PLG company, we actually have a lot of great content. We have a great help center, we have great YouTube videos, and we have a super active community that's creating user generated content all the time. So there's a template for anything you can think of. So the value of the CSM is not necessarily in like, let me show you how to click a button or create a
Right.
template or create a database, but it's the let me teach you the best practices. And I've seen what this looks like at very large companies. You know, we have Notion rolled out at companies up to 10,000 employees.
Wow.
And so the role of the CSM becomes that advisor on that change management piece and on
I
those
love
best
that.
practices. So it's made us much more valuable. We are seen as a strategic advisor. And we often get asked that question a lot, which is like, tell me how other organizations are doing this and tell me how they have basically launched this to their employee base where people are really excited to adopt and people are really excited to um, put their work out there for greater collaboration. So we've actually adopted a lot of our initial kind of onboarding programs and onboarding practices to touch on the change management piece as much as possible. So as an example, part of our onboarding program is what we call forming the Notion Council. And it's where we advise our customers to form a Notion council internally and appoint internal owners, champions, content admins from all different functions, all different departments to be part of making Notion a success. And we work with them directly kind of through a train the trainers model, but we empower them to kind of be like the customer success managers on the floor. Another thing we do is we help with internal communications. So we help our customers draft what an internal announcement could look like, what emails look like to say like, hey, we're starting Notion. This is why Notion is great. This is what you can expect. We speak at our customers all hands as the Notion rep, and we say, hey, I'm here. Super excited that X company is ready to take on this challenge. This is one of your core goals for the next year is better async communication, better internal collaboration. So we'll come to their all hands. So we're actually spending a lot more time on those types of things rather than the specific feature enablement.
I love that. It's so hard for CS teams to become that strategic asset to organizations, but once you can crack that code, you're not going anywhere, right? And it's awesome to hear that your team's able to do that. And I love that you're training your customers, enabling your customers to be able to have these conversations, because that helps your efforts get even stickier and scale CS internally.
That's
cool.
right.
Awesome. Great, Monica. Well, I want to shift to a really different direction for the rest of our conversation. As our guests know, we are doing rapid fire questions of 1 to 2 words each. So I'm going to go through 8 questions here and would love for you to answer. First thing that comes to mind, maximum 2-3 words, and we'll start now. All right, Monica, what is the best metric of success for customer success?
I gotta stick to 2 words.
I'll give you 3 or 4.
Health scores. And I want to elaborate, but it looks like
Go for it.
if you have really good health scoring, maybe this is kind of underrated, but if you have very good health scoring that accounts for kind of all of the dimensions we talked about today, like verified outcomes, value, as well as adoption, then your health score can be your guiding light, and it helps the CSM determine exactly what they should do next. So I'm a big proponent of health scores. As leading indicators, I would say best lagging indicator is NRR.
Okay, great. Health score, 2 words, love it. What's the worst metric? Yes.
Ooh, okay. I would say like NPS CSAT for CS specifically. It oftentimes tends to be a reflection of lots of other things. Yes. It's good for the company to track over a very long time horizon, but for CS, I would not.
Not good. I agree. What's the most underrated part of CS?
I would say the CSM gets the chance to be like the kernel that connects all parts of the org. The CSM is external facing and internal facing. The CSM is on the forefront with the clients, but can talk to the product teams, can talk to the marketing teams and inform them on what people need to hear or need in the product. So I don't know if we talk about this enough, but I think it's really fun and special to be in CS because you are so uniquely positioned to help your org, but also to help clients. So I would say just the fact that you kind of have your hands in everything.
Love it. What is the most overrated part of CS?
Probably an over focus on activity and busyness, like schedule a QBR, schedule this meeting for the sake of doing it. I don't think we really nailed why that is something that we've historically pushed on.
That's current state of CS.
Definitely anchoring to value. Definitely understanding your customer like pretty intimately. If you don't understand your customer really well, your competitors are just going to understand them better and speak to them better. So just a renewed focus on knowing your business as a CSM, knowing your customer very, very well, and aligning yourself to value.
Love it. All right. 2-3 words on the future of CS.
I think CSMs are going to be more powerful in the commercials than they are today. I am seeing a lot of research saying that, this is more than 2 words, by the way. I'm seeing a lot of research saying that future buyers are millennials, the future software buyers are Gen Z. They don't want to speak to anybody on the phone. They probably don't want to go through those traditional motions. They'll probably have access to a CS person earlier, and then that CS person will be able to loop in the commercials. But I think we're going to be seeing a very different sales motion that's very consultative and value driven in nature. So I see the CSM being much more powerful than even a traditional seller in the future.
That's a great answer. What is the best CS book or podcast?
There's lots out there. So it's not a book or a podcast, but it's a Harvard Business Review article that I revisit every month. It's from like 2008 probably. It's called Blitzscaling. And every time I read it, I feel like they are looking into Notion. So if nobody has ever read Blitzscale at a hypergrowth startup, please check it out. It speaks to exactly the phases that you're probably going to go through, and I constantly share it with my team.
It's great. I've not read that. I will add that to my list.
You need.
Finally, the last question: the best community for CS leaders.
Not biased at all, but I would say the customer success meetup community. It's the largest nationally on Meetup for customer success professionals. And as I mentioned, we're trying really hard to expand the representation in different cities. So we're bi-coastal, but I think we're going to have smaller events in other cities like Austin and things like that.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, that wraps it up for the podcast. Is there anything you'd like to personally share with the audience about anything you're working on, or if they want to contact you to learn more? The floor is yours.
I would say it's a really good time to be in CS, despite what people are seeing. I recently saw an article on LinkedIn, I think it was by Andreessen or another VC, saying that their founders are hiring CS leads earlier than ever. It's one of the first hires that they're seeing post, like their engineering and product leaders thinking about hiring their first CS leaders. And I think we're seeing a world where, especially in this economy, top of funnel is tough, new expenditure is tough, but we can support our existing customers, we can hold the base, we can grow our existing customers, and just a renewed focus on existing business and customer success for a long-term view of growth rather than short-term. So it's a really great time to be in customer success. I encourage everybody listening today, and I think that founders, especially of SaaS in this next year, are really thinking about CS as a strategic hire.
Amazing. Well, this was awesome. Thank you so much, Monica, for your time today and answering all these questions and all the incredible insights you shared.
This is great.
For folks who want to learn more, I will include Monica's contact information on the comments below, and you can reach out to her that way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
Talk soon.